So welcome, Dave, to the Science of Sport podcast. I think one of the quotes that I've read from you on many different occasions on the papers that you've written about, and there's a great quote which said, there, just on his colleague, it just said, young athletes are ill-equipped to handle the inevitable failure that all athletes face. And that kind of leads us into the general discussion which we're going to have today, talking about this concept around talent needs trauma. Can you just give us an idea of where this theory came from and the studies that you did that sort of supported this general overview of that talent needs trauma idea?
Gosh. Okay. Imagine you've got a little child and they've been learning to cycle on a bike with trainer wheels. And then you want to take the trainer wheels off. And I've done it with all my 5 kids, got to help them. And you have to grab them by the scruff of the neck and run along beside them and then let go. And then they wobble or they land or they hurt themselves or whatever. And when I say trauma, it's traumatic. It's upsetting. But if you didn't let go, if you always protected them against upset, then they wouldn't progress or their progression would be limited. So where this came from was really, first off, the idea that good parenting is often upsetting temporarily your child. And also that when you look at the records of people who've made it through, lots of them have undergone, traumatic issues. And then personally, that as you progress, you get upset. And because you put yourself in a situation of challenge. And when you don't achieve, that's upsetting. But if you don't put yourself in that position of being upset, then your progression is either can't occur or is very, very limited to occur. So it came to me, Mike, that it's almost like thinking, if I want to get fitter, I have to go and hurt myself. Now, when you say hurt myself, everybody gets all upset and you go, no, but you do, don't you? That's the whole point. It's a systematic overload and then a recovery. Does training hard hurt? Damn right. But that's what you have to do. And it struck me that the same sort of thing occurs to us psychologically, that actually me making progression is going to involve me putting myself in circumstances where sometimes I'm going to get upset. So the use of the word trauma has led lots of people to do this. But all I'm saying is it's traumatic. It's upsetting. It was upsetting for me when I didn't get into the parachute regiment. Yeah, didn't matter. I got a Royal Marines anyway. But it was upsetting. Yeah, and yeah. I was in tears. And I could have avoided that by just not going to Sandhurst and not trying to get in the first place. But I didn't. So the idea is that to progress, you're going to need challenge. And whether it's music or sport or dance or academics or doing podcasts, you're going to get to a situation where you have to challenge yourself. And that challenge is sometimes traumatic.
When you chose to title the paper that, did you anticipate the trauma would rub people up so much the wrong way? And if you'd gone back now, would you have called it challenge? Or does challenge not do justice to what you were trying to describe, out of interest?
I think that's a good question. 2020 hindsight. I think my co-author, you see, it was only the subtitle. The main title was The Rocky Road to Success.
Yeah.
And that was the point. And that was the point we were trying to get over. And since, in several papers, we've gone, hang on a minute, trauma just means upset. It can mean extreme upset, but it can just mean upset. And we just went, okay, talent needs, all right. So if I'd have gone, talent needs upset, I use, I'm sure it's a common word in South African vernacular, Ross, I use discombobulation.
Yeah, you use it when you're trying to flex. You use it when you're trying to flex your language skills.
No, mate, it's just a good Scrabble score.
just to clarify where you're going with this and talking about that paper that you did. This was the paper that you wrote back in 2012, along with I think it was Amy McNamara.
No, please get her name. She gets told of all sorts of things. Anya.
Anya McNamara. There we go.
And this will be in the show notes, by the way, for
Yeah.
listeners. It'll be find the link to these papers. Yeah.
So she was a colleague at the University of Central Lancashire, and the
He was
paper was
working with
called.
me, yeah.
That's right. And the paper was called "The Rocky Road to the Top: Why Talent Needs Trauma." And I mean,
Yeah.
Ross's question was kind of partly also my question. When you did this study, what motivated you to do it? In other words, what ideas were you coming up with before that motivated you to do that study? What was the process?
We had been looking at, well, I mean, I'd been looking at talent development since, gosh, probably 1998. Sorry, 1988, and we'd recognised that the process of talent development was upsetting. It was challenging. Less than 0.5% of individuals went up with a smooth pathway. Anybody else who went up with a smooth pathway, eventually the wheels came off and they almost rebounded off a glass ceiling because they'd never experienced and got the confidence to be able to handle the challenge. But the most of them, and we've done about, 7,000 of them now. So we go to someone who's made it and said, do me a timeline of your life, your progress on the way up. And they're all bumpy. And they're idiosyncratically bumpy as well. So even when you got monozygotic twins in the same sport, in the same experience, this one's going up, this one's going down. They're very, very bumpy. They're very rocky roadish. So we're then going, okay, so it's a parallel bit of work. We were developing a set of skills that we thought would be useful for people in the talent development space, the psychological characteristics of developing excellence, or PCDEs. We were also looking at the type of talent development environment that would work, talent development environment questionnaire, but we were recognizing that both of these things flexed by the level of challenge, and that the challenge sometimes inevitably meant that people would fail, and they were upset by that failure. Of course they were upset by the failure because they wanted to be a top class gymnast, rugby player, dancer, musician. And you see, the real interesting thing for us is that when you talk to people who are on that pathway, especially they're getting towards the top end, they go, of course it has to be. Yeah. What really ticks them off is needless mucking around, is needless pressure. But they recognize that it has to be challenging and that challenge will involve some upset. Of course it will. I can't be successful all the time. Wish I could. Big S on the chest for Dave. Yeah, but it doesn't work.
Yeah. Dave, you spoke earlier when you explained the concept using the example of training wheels on a bike, take them off, you're going to fall over, but if you want to make that bike go, you've got to accept that. Does trauma apply does trauma transfer? In other words, does the trauma that I experience in my life in one domain have potential benefits in your model for how I deal with failure in sport, for instance? So does the trauma, the upset, the challenge need to be domain specific, or does it actually then come across so that you can look at life experiences outside of sport as contributing to sporting success?
Question. And the 2012 paper suggested it did, because you had a high number of players who were making it who'd they'd experienced parental divorce or sibling issues or whatever. So it would. You've also got the Great British Medalist study that showed that it said every single multiple medalist in their study had experienced a major life trauma in association with sporting success. Now, in our data, and we've probably got, I don't know, about 150 now of these triads I'll talk about in a minute. And we haven't found that much. But what we would agree is that there is a good potential for transfer from this life challenge to this life challenge. The problem is that it tends to be a human trait that we compartmentalize our experiences. So, for example, you might have, I used to teach maths, science, and PE, God help me. And I'd be saying, so, you did this in maths. Oh, yeah, but this is PE. Yeah, I know, but you can use it over here, can I? Yes, you're all right. Because we tend to say, well, that's knowledge there. So, I would work with professional footballers who were immensely able and resilient in the challenges on a pitch, but they can't apply that to their life. So there is a tendency for lots of people to compartmentalize or silo those experiences. However, Ross, you're absolutely right that if I've gained this experience and I can recognize that it transfers, that's good. So when we work in an academy setting, we're giving the guys challenge, but we're encouraging them to use this process of sorting out the challenge across. So we're saying, do that on the training pitch, do it in your schoolwork, do it in your life, do it with your mates. And certainly in some of the football academies I work with, we're talking about, North London working class kids whose mates are probably pushing drugs. And we're saying, look, you've got to walk away from that. So use these skills over here. So if you can encourage people to make that transfer, it works beautifully. And in actual fact, it equips them better for life as an athlete and life after, outside.
What I'm interested to know is when you look at those studies, and just to kind of delve into that a little bit, you talked a bit about the fact that there are major life traumas associated with the sport. Do you have a baseline that looks at the general population to say that there is a higher percentage of top performers, whether it's sport, music, whatever it is, that have a trauma versus the general? In other words, is there a higher level of trauma in high performers than there is in the general population? In other words, can you make a direct correlation between, because obviously if you look at the general population, most people will say they've had some sort of trauma in the first 20 years of their life, whether it's minor or being left out of the choir or being, losing a parent. So you're very specifically saying that there is a higher level of trauma percentage-wise in top performers than the general population.
You're asking about a control group, and I love this. I love the scientific integrity and robustness. It's awesome. Go for it.
Some would suggest so. Yes, some would say actually to get to the top, you've experienced more challenge, or more upset, more trauma. I'll use the T word. So long I'm amongst friends, no one else is watching this, so we're all. But I'm in a situation where some would say yes, they have. Now you see, I don't think that's necessarily so. What I think is that they've handled it better.
Right.
The minute, look, okay, so here I am. I'm going to school, and I find my lessons challenging, but that's okay. And I'm going out with my mates, and sometimes we have arguments, but that's okay. But in this area of my life, I want to be great at karate. And I train and train and train at karate. And so much of my identity is built around me as a karateka. That's me, that Dave the karateka. Yeah. I have inevitably put myself in the way of more trauma, haven't I? Because all of a sudden I've said, if I don't succeed in this, I don't look much. So I've made the decision to put myself in a situation where the quanta of upset I get is probably high, but the area in which I experience it is also high. Does that make sense? So it's my decision. I put myself there. If I'm learning to play the violin, then I put myself there. But if it's important to me, it's not important to me. If it's just a goofing off, then fair enough. But if I put myself in a performance domain and I've said, I really want to be good at this, then I've put myself in a situation where I'm going to be upset. And again, if we go back to your original question, Mike, what I'm talking about is that, therefore, let's recognize that. Let's not quite embrace it, but let's employ it. Let's use it. Let's know, look, you've made a decision. You want to be great at rugby or great at dance or great at playing the violin. Okay, that's going to experience, you're going to experience some challenges here. Let's prepare you for them. Let's use those challenges as a growth experience rather than being so much about well-being. This is another of my bet wild, performance and well-being. They're seen as like either joined at the hip or things you either have that or have that. I've been a performance psychologist since 1984, and appropriate date. But I've always been worried about the welfare of my clients. But if I was primarily worried about the welfare of my clients, I'd be a counseling psychologist, which I am as well. Yeah. But if I'm doing performance, I'm doing performance.
What you said there about, you spoke about karate, but I think it's true of all athletes, is if I was to read or listen to other podcasts, not this one, and understand how they approach this, I was listening to one the other day saying Mark Cavendish managed to improve his mental health by taking away the focus on himself, the cyclist, and realizing that he was much more than that. Is that something you try and de-emphasize with people, or should you actually play it up and say, look, your identity is by your own choice wrapped up in your sports performance, and we want to actually leverage and embrace that? Or do you do what I gather Pop Psych is telling me, which is to say, no, you're not just cyclist, you're not just karate, and we have to try and play that down? It seems to me that those two things can create a tension.
You guys are asking some excellent questions. You've clearly done your homework. On my gravestone, or certainly on my social media thing, it says it depends is a big thing for me, because I don't think things are black and white. So my answer is going to be it depends. And I think it depends on a lot of things. It depends, for example, on the age and stage of the athlete. Yeah. So it's very difficult to turn around to a 9 or 10-year-old who has just signed for Chelsea and say, mate, you might not make it, but you've got to do it. And you've got to then soften that aspect of, but you also exploit it. It's also very, very difficult, I think, to turn around to a 30-something very successful athlete and say, you've got to recognize you're more than just that. But again, it works. It's the thou shalt do this that upsets me. It's the fact that you must decrease. It's like when I was a teacher, educational principles and competition, everybody was very anti-competition. So we came up with educational athletics. On your mark, set, in your own time, go on. It's something else. Yeah. So I guess my answer is it depends. In certain circumstances, you do need to do that in exactly the same way as if you had a workaholic or a chocoholic or an alcoholic, you would try and reduce their dependence on this one area. That's fine. But that doesn't mean that you negate, ignore, counter, criticize someone's drive.
So with that in mind, would you look favorably or not on schools that offer participation trophies and try and de-emphasize the result? There was some conversation, I think it was 2 years ago when the Winter Olympics won, that the Norwegian model is very much about encouraging participation and not performance, but they must do some. But again, it strikes me as an area where the media tends to overplay one side of it. And I wanted your thoughts on that. The change in almost ethos and values around competition. You've just you hinted at it there already.
I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to get children and young people hooked on what used to be called a positive addiction, which is sport, exercise, and that sort of stuff. We like that. That's what we want. And if we can encourage them to do that, that's fine. But I would, and I did as a parent, and I have as an educationist, and I have as a teacher, it's not just turning up. It's not winning. It's how did you do? What did you learn? So when my kids come back, how do you get on? Did you enjoy it? Is the most important thing. But unless you're some sort of masochist, no one particularly likes being beaten 65-0. And I've been on both sides of that. Yeah. So it's a case of making good use of it. So, taking part, medals, yeah, probably. If that's encouraging to people, if that's what they want to do, then that's great. But it's something slightly different to performance, isn't it? Oh, by the way, sorry, just to be clear, I once ran a just 3 hours 31 marathon. Yeah. You've met me, Ross. I'm a reasonably big unit. I was very proud of that. I've got metal knees and I'm an old man. I'm rep squatting 250 kilos in the gym. I'm quite pleased with that as well. However, I'm more suited physiologically to one than the other, but they're both performance. To make sense. Yeah. So I would happily work with someone who was driving themselves to run a marathon because it's performance. That's fine. Yeah. So performance doesn't mean elitism necessarily. It means I have an aspiration to be as good as I possibly can.
So in your work with your your elite athletes, obviously, is there a path that you decide on with elite? Because you talked a bit about participation and enjoyment, et cetera, but when it comes directly to elite performance, in other words, how is somebody going to do the Olympic Games? Is there a strategy psychologically in terms of how you grow confidence and build an athlete up to believe? Because, you know, I work as an editor across Runners World and bicycling magazines here in South Africa, and I've interviewed a lot of professional athletes, and what I'm fascinated about is what motivates them to go out every day. And for many of those professional athletes, it's a lonely existence and a very hard existence, but yet they manage to do it. So the psychology of them is interesting because it's not the physical side, it's the ability to believe in it's the ability to believe that they can get to the top of their sport. It is absolutely about the results at the end of the day.
Yes. And of course you have that agenda. And if you don't have that agenda, then you're not very good. You know, it's I mean, we spoke before we started recording, Ross, about you know, the quality of sports psychology in the UK. I'm not very happy about it. I think there are too many people who are now a bit cuddly, fluffy bunny, and oh, never mind, you know. No, if you're in Olympics, you're in Olympics. Now, they've done something I could never do. You know, I mean, I was an international American footballer, and my old dad said, well, you have to choose a bloody sport to go. Yeah, okay, fine. I don't know. I've sung the national anthem. I'm all right. But it's a case of why you're there. Yeah. Now, for you, that might be, okay, let's get through the first round. For you, it's let's get in the final. For you, it's let's get on the podium. Let's set the targets and let's be realistic about the targets. And then let's try and get 101%. And that's fine. But of course, your long-term agenda, not on to with the client. We do all this stuff, it's collaborative, and we're working in tandem with parents, with coaches, with everything else, is to take people forward. Biggest thing, Mike, teach skills. Teach and help them to deploy skills so that they can drive themselves to get up in the early morning and do their miles, that they can go in and do a hard session before they go to work and another one afterwards, etc., etc. Because you said you wanted this, okay, this is what you want. This is
so when you say skills, are you talking about mental skills here?
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
All right. So give us an example of what you mean by mental skills.
Okay,
a few examples.
I'd actually call them psychobehavioral skills, as in the PCDEs, and there's 10. And that's what you do. So self-regulation, quality practice, motivation, effective and controllable imagery, seeking and using social support, blah, 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 set of skills that you give them. And it's like a hand of cards. So now when I'm faced with a problem, I go, oh, okay, right. So Mike, you've got this problem. You're finding it hard to get up in the morning train. Okay, let's try a bit of goal setting and a bit of self-regulation. Yeah. 3 months later, we're going, actually, you've moved on now, mate. Probably put a bit of this quality practice and a bit of this seeking and help using social support. Yeah. Meanwhile, Ross over here has got a different set of challenges. Okay. But if I've given him those 10 skills, that hand of cards, then he can draw on them to do it. So when I see, what's fashionable at the minute? Fashionable at the minute in psychology, psychological safety. Yeah. 10 years ago, mental toughness. 10 years before that, facilitative and debilitative anxiety. God knows what that was. I couldn't even spell it, but never mind. There were all these different things that came through. My point is, whatever it is you want, sometimes you want to be resilient. Sometimes you might not. Sometimes you want to be gritty. There's another one. Sometimes not. You've got the skills and you can deploy the skills. And I've given you the challenges on the way up. And I've given you the practice at increasingly succeeding, but not succeeding all the time. Otherwise, I might as well just give you a participation medal so that you're confident you've got these skills. And when the fans start getting clogged, you can execute.
And when you say things are fashionable, I mean, not to hone in on many of obviously, if you had to hone in on every one of these skills, we'd be here for 3 hours. But you talked about psychological confidence. Just for example, what does that mean in terms of, if that's the current buzzwords around sports psychology at the moment?
I don't think confidence is so much one of the psychological safety.
Safety. Yeah,
psychological safety.
Yeah, what does that mean?
God knows. I know what the original work said it was, and it was an environment where people felt that they could express their opinion and not get sanctioned. Now, I don't know about you, Ross, but the vast majority of rugby situations I've been in, not all, but the majority, the coach will turn around to the players and say, "What do you think? How did that go?" Yeah, there is a senior players group that talk about stuff. You know, opinions are solicited. So I don't think that psychological safety is particularly rare in most sports, as people would suggest it is. Yeah, but
yeah, I think that's true, and part of it I would say is because teams that facilitate varied inputs from senior players, and sometimes not even senior but junior players, tend to perform better. So the two things are not actually in opposition with one another. The idea that you should not seek advice and input from other people is probably performance hindering, not enhancing. So
absolutely right. Sorry to jump in, but the problem for me is that the idea of psychological safety has been misapprehended and misapplied by some people. And as a consequence, I get a bunch of coaches who don't know whether they can be critical or not. Can I give critical feedback? Is that okay? And they're actually quite worried, quite aware of, well, what can I say? What can't I say? Yeah. And that, I mean, that's a whole line. And I'm not suggesting that we're going to be abusive in the same way as I'm not suggesting that talent needs trauma means you beat them with a baseball bat. What I'm suggesting is that there is a necessity as a coach, as a teacher, to upset people. Yeah, that doesn't mean you upset them for no reason, but you're going to do things that challenge them, that take them where they don't think they can go, by definition.
Yeah, it's linked, isn't it? We did a little bit of work a couple of years back. Well, we were on a project together, and we won't go into the details of it, but it concerned the notion of wellness and a definition that gets sort of bandied around, and sort of a one-sentence definition of it is feeling good and functioning well. But I think, you see, misapplied, you can see how that is in opposition with the performance model that Dave's proposing, right? Because feeling good and functioning well means never overexerting in some people's minds, never challenging, never creating trauma, never creating upset. And I know that you push back quite hard on that. And that's the same thing, isn't it, as psychological safety?
Oh, very, very much so. And I mean, you and I, I mean, you know, I think you did very well staying awake in through those little things. But you know, so World Health Organization definition: well-being can be observed by the extent to which people can build capacity for action and are prepared to transcend challenges. Unquote. Now, if that's well-being, I'm right with you.
Yeah,
I'll bite your arm off.
Yeah, that's a very good definition, because I wouldn't have thought. It's almost like it gives you the ammunition to take on the challenges, which I never thought of it in that.
And to want to take on challenges, to want to progress yourself. Yeah,
the sort of social wind direction is blowing in the other direction, right? It wants to downplay, minimize challenge, and feel good.
Yeah,
I think there's a climate around doing that, which I think has hijacked that definition.
You see, I'd have to agree. People talk about fun in kids' sports, you know, and again, somewhere in this, there's a point. There is a point to the need for fun in youth sports. Of course there is, but the idea that therefore you should only do what the kids want, which is where some people, indeed some organisations, have taken it, is reductio ad absurdum. They've taken it too far. Yeah. If I'm running a karate class, I'm running a class with kids who want to do karate. If I'm running a dance class, I'm running a class with kids who want to do dance. If I wanted them just to have fun, I'd probably get a candy floss machine and a load, you know, I'm going to say Game Boys. That dates me, doesn't it? But you know what I mean. You know, that they'll enjoy that. But part of that doesn't mean I make the sessions horrible and hard and nasty. But it does mean we challenge them and we get them pleased about the feeling of success. Because for me, that's, as a teacher, as an educator, that's the human condition. Helping people to say, come on, you want to do that? Go on in, you can. Sometimes being realistic, you know, Dave, you're probably not going to be a world-class marathon runner, A, at 70 and B, at 100 odd kilos. You ain't going to do it, son. However, be the best runner you can be. Okay, let's use it. So this idea of what I would like to see as a human condition and the things that humans develop through sport is an ability to progress.
Yeah.
And your point, Ross, about transfer of that is well made, because that's the old Olympic, that's the old idea, isn't it? The old idea of Waterloo being won on the playing fields of Eton. You know, that you challenge people on the sports pitch and it transfers.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I hadn't heard that Waterloo was won on the fields of Eton. That reference is, I get what it means, but I've not heard it before.
Yeah.
Can I lead the conversation? You have alluded to this a little bit. So in fairness, if you've touched on it, but I think a good parent, a good coach, a good athlete, a good sports performance psychologist then understands that this trauma is necessary. But it's very important, I would imagine, to get the dosage and the timing just right. You've mentioned Don't do it needlessly. And there are athletes whose careers have been undone by trauma because it was just too much, too soon, at the wrong time, all at once.
Absolutely.
How does a person listening to this understand that titration and manage that dosage once the athlete's in that system?
I think you're absolutely right to emphasize that. But my question back would be, why is that really so hard to understand? Yeah, do you, would good parenting always be shouting and screaming at a child?
No, very rarely, I would have thought, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Would good parenting always be giving in to your child and giving them what they want whenever they want it?
No, of course not.
No, of course not. So what we're talking about are two extremes that are banal. Yeah. So the idea of balance is pretty implicit. It's pretty explicit. Now, what therefore you do to that balance is really important. So within an academy, knowing what the challenge is doing to the young player, the young performer, and monitoring that and being careful as to when you might moderate the challenge. Okay, school exams at the minute, let's let off a bit. Yeah. Relationship issues, let's let off a bit. Peak height velocity growth spurt, let's let off a bit. So what you start to do is you start to moderate that. I should add, of course, that the relationship that the parent has is different to the relationship that the coach might have. Yeah. It's caring for and caring about. If I care about you, I might challenge you more. If I'm caring for you, look, it doesn't matter. If you don't succeed, you can always come back. I'm always here for you. I love you, whatever. Unconditional positive good regard, etc., etc. And that's a parental relationship. But even in the parental relationship, it strikes me that it's, to use a technical term, pretty bloody obvious that there's a necessity for balance.
Yes, I get. Yeah, you're right. And your question back exposes mine as a bit banal, as you said. However, what about, and maybe this is a manifestation of something slightly different, or maybe it's not, but we've seen in elite sport, not just in the UK, the USA, even here in South Africa, allegations of bullying and a culture of aggression and coaching that is harmful to the athlete. So there is a risk of the flip side, no? We spoke about how people make it too soft, but can it not be the opposite?
And you're talking about, when you talk about coaching, you're talking about coaches bullying athletes.
Yeah, the cultures like, the Salazar scandal. There have been a number of sports in the UK. We have heard those, and I wanted your thoughts on whether those are manifestations of too much trauma, inadvertent or not, or whether it's something else that's going on there.
The short answer is I just think that's piss poor coaching. It's poor coaching. It's just someone with an ego issue.
Yeah.
In male settings, I always call it SWS, small willy syndrome. That they're pushing stuff so hard to say, look at me, I'm this big. No, it's not so. But you see, it's interesting when the talent meets trauma argument was at its height. A correspondent for one of the coaching things in the UK said, I was at a riding stables, and the riding instructor undid the straps on the saddle so that the girl fell off and then looked at me and said, oh, well, talent needs trauma. Now, A, I don't believe her. B, she should have referred her to and got her struck off, because that's crazy. C, they should have called the police, because the woman's a bloody woman, man, whatever, is an idiot. Yeah, it's just everybody tries to use this. I don't think our position is extreme, and as I've explained to you, I don't think our position is extreme. Would you always let your child do what they want? No. Would you always batter and chase and shout and scream at your child? No. There is a medium, and that medium will vary. Okay, so as a coach, that medium will vary. So one of the things we've done in trying to help coaches is we've come up with what we call a RIB model: rationale, intent, behavior. So I'll give you two examples. So you look at a gymnast, 10-year-old. The coach is trying to convince her to do a move that she's scared of. She's in tears. He threatens to lock her in a cupboard if she doesn't do the move. Abuse?
Yeah. Yeah.
Damn right.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
of course.
Right, damn right. I'm standing with a New Zealand free ski and snowboard team at the top of a half pipe, and a young 10-year-old is about to do their first 360. They're about to go boom, boom, once and down. Now, they're doing it about 5 or 6 times now. I lose count, but it's scary for the child. The child is in skiers. The coach is going, go on, you got this, you're all right. Abuse?
No, because the child wants it, and it's positively
It
directed in a positive direction, no?
It might be. It might be. The first one, it is. The second one, it might be. How do you distinguish? You ask for the rationale, you ask for the intent, you ask for, as you said, Ross, the involvement of the child. Has the child said they want to try and do this? Where you go. Yeah. So what we're looking at is we're looking at circumstances where we recognize that people might, coaches might, encourage children to do stuff that they're worried about. Yeah. I mean, gosh, I've been teaching gymnastics in a school PE lesson, and some kids found it hard to do a forward roll. So I'm helping them to do a forward roll. It's scary for them. Come on, it's all right. Just try this. Yeah. I love adventure sports. I've always used the outdoors as a teaching medium. I remember taking a bunch of kids from Milton Keynes, which is an industrial, it's a sort of a new city in the middle of, it's not particularly rich. And I took all these kids away. We're walking up a mountain, and one of them goes, Sir, I'm having a heart attack. Are you? How do you know? I can feel my heart beating in it. No, you're just knackered, mate. I'm knackered as well. Come on, we're all right. Yeah. Now I'm helping him through it. I'm not belittling him. I'm helping him through it. I'm saying, oh, look, we were down there. We're now up here. God, isn't that great? Sort of stuff. So I guess what I'm saying is that abuse is pretty obvious. Pretty obvious. Questionable practice, then you have to be careful and you have to tease through it. Yeah? Does it make sense?
It does. I don't know if I can verbalize this right, but it just occurred to me when you're talking about your hike up the mountain with the kids from Milton Keynes, it struck me many times in my life, and maybe both of you as well, is that if you haven't experienced this element of sport, it does seem unnaturally hard. It's tough, right? Like that pain of hurting. Like you try and give a new person, take someone who's never trained, never exercised, and you put them there. It's really uncomfortable for them, right? So to us, it's normalized. So whilst I understand that abuse is obvious and then there's questionable behaviors, is there a degree to which we've normalized what shouldn't have been? And that example of hiking is not one of them, because that's just physiological load. But have elite sports environments normalized things that society shouldn't have or wouldn't have outside? And does it matter?
For example, like, I'm just trying to understand what you're saying there.
Yeah, this is why I said at the start, I don't know if I can explain this. And now you've exposed that I can't. Dave will probably have a better way to do this than I can. But regular weigh-ins, monitoring diet, like to the weighing food, for instance, playing through injury. I'm actually in pain here. I've got a grade 2 calf muscle strain. I'm Kerry Strug at the Atlanta Olympics, and my ankle ligament is gone. I'm cooked, but I'm going to do this vault and land on it no matter what happens, because it's my Olympic Games. we celebrate that. And I'm not saying we shouldn't. I actually think we should. It's great stuff. That's what makes sport valuable, right? But I can understand why someone from the outside goes like, these people are nuts.
Okay, I understand your
Does
question.
that make sense? Are they better?
And
Are there
now,
better
and now I
examples?
hear you. Yeah, I mean, I remember a Mr. Shelford playing the whole of the second half with his a part of his anatomy hanging off.
Yeah, like Tyler Hamilton, Tour de France. Okay, like grinding the teeth down. Remember that with the collarbone fracture. So like you look at that and you say, this is crazy. And we saw it recently as well. There was a cycling event. There was a big controversy over it. Concussion in sport. I mean, I play it at home here.
Look,
Like,
what you're doing. I mean, it's like when I trained in karate, I had big calluses on my knuckles, and you train for calluses on the knuckles. You actually move the tendons over, and everybody would go, ugh. And my karate master would say, well, you know, if you play guitar, you get a blister on your little finger, maybe get a blister on your thumb. You know, that's what happens. If you're a dancer, you ever seen ballet dancers' feet?
oh yeah.
You know,
exactly.
So what you're saying is that the minute you go to something extreme,
extraordinary.
Yeah. But you see, one man's excessive, or one person's excessive, is another person's norm.
Yeah.
And what always used to make me laugh is when I was, you know, like cavers would say, "Oh, bloody climbers, they're mad." You know, caving now, that's fine. And all the climbers are going, "Cavers, they're bloody mad." You know, so it's very relative. But you see, my point here is that an open debate about the rationale, the intent around the behavior is probably our best way forwards. You know, so would you coach a 12-year-old in a different way to which you would coach a 22-year-old? Yeah. Would you expect different standards of application from a 12-year-old and a 22-year-old? Yeah. Would you encourage the 12-year-old and the 22-year-old to be realistic in their expectations of themselves and others? Yeah. You know, so rather than say very, very few things in life are black and white. Yeah. Most things are shades of grey. Hence, grey matters. Yeah. Hence, you know, it depends. Hence, professional judgment decision making. My point is, can we be a little bit more nuanced?
Yeah. When you said the ballet dancers, I remember I was speaking once to a ballet dancer, a very accomplished dancer that I knew once, and she once sent me a photograph of an elite cyclist leg at the Tour de France. You know those pics where you can almost see sinews, you can see veins and so forth. And she said, "This is amazing. That's awesome." You show someone else who doesn't understand either ballet or cycling, they go, "That is horrific. How is that accepted?" So that's the difference. It's perspectives that are created by experience. And I suppose the follow-on question for me then is, when we try and think about designing a system, and a system could literally be a parent, their aspirant athlete, and the coach or teacher, and so on. It doesn't have to be the Great Britain or the South African sports system. At some point, the system has to filter out people who don't have an appetite to accept that normalcy, right? Yeah. So how do you
that relative normalcy?
Yes. What we said is going to be normal.
Yeah,
it's
so in other words,
for you. You've got
if you're not prepared to have sore feet as a ballet dancer, you're not going to be a good ballet dancer.
Right. So you
have to accept that as a
exactly. Right. So that's from the bottom up, and then from the top down, the sport also has to. Like, I'll come back to concussion. We cannot accept normal. We cannot make it normal that a player who's concussed continues to play because this is how you are tough. So someone's got to set a line from the top, and someone's got to set a line from the bottom. And I wonder about that balance.
But again, I think that having that balance out in front. So, for example, I played American football, and classic American football coaches wouldn't let you drink in sessions. Well, that's bloody silly. Why is that? Or it toughens them up. No, it doesn't. It just makes them dehydrated and they lose concentration. You know, so, you know, I mean, you know, I went through reasonably challenging training in the military. But there was an insistence on looking after yourself. Why? Because if you couldn't look after yourself, you wouldn't be able to function. If you couldn't function, you're no bloody good. So no, drink, eat, do this, do that. So I think rather the arguments, I think, in all these senses become very polarized, and everybody creates a very polarized position as to which way they want to go. And all I'm saying is that, of course, there are polarized positions in either end of that continuum, which are ridiculous. What you're talking about is where does our position in here? So I don't know, the aesthetics of a bodybuilder. For some people, marvelous, wonderful, attractive. For some people, excessive. Yeah, I'm not into tattoos. You know, for some people, marvelous, wonderful, this, that, and the other. For me, don't think so. You know, but it's that they're personal. But so now we come down to whose decision. Is it an informed decision? And as scientists, you know, we talk about informed consent. As medics, they talk about informed consent. So is someone understanding the full range, you know, what's required here? And if that's fine, it's fine. I used to work in motorsport, and you would get kids who were coming up motorsport. Some mum and dads were very rich, some mum and dads were less rich. And all of a sudden we reached a level where junior wanted to go into, I don't know, open wheels, Ginetta, you know, the lowest of the race cars as opposed to a kart. And the mum and dad are going, well, you know, if we mortgage the house, we can do. No. And I'm going, no, don't go there, because you have to mortgage the house here. What are you going to do when he needs to go into the next one and it's 100 grand a seat? No. Think about it. Think about the consequences. In actual fact, as a completely separate to this discussion, people don't think consequences enough. Teachers don't, coaches don't, parents don't, God knows teenagers don't. Yeah, you don't. If I do this, then that might happen. That's all. And now we're having a grown-up, or no, not grown-up. We're having an adult conversation about consequences. And I think that's the way to go. And there are certain absolutes, like Ross, you say, you don't play with concussion. Yeah. You probably don't play with your parts of your anatomy hanging off. Yeah. Unless you're an All Black and it's an important game. But even then, I don't want you doing this. I don't want you doing this for your school under 12s.
Yeah. Let's take a slightly different tack, because obviously, as you were talking about at the beginning of this podcast around the Olympic Games, when you look at top performing athletes, can you give us a bit of an idea of the psychology involved in them? When I watch, you know, a swimmer getting onto the start line and going off, and they're going to win by 100th of a second. What is it that you see in top performing athletes compared to the next level down? In other words, what do the winners have psychologically that the next level don't have?
And you can't say it depends.
No, I can't say it depends, because if I were saying it depends, I wouldn't have developed the PCDEs and said, there you are, that is the method of taking you through. So they have that. Ross made a point about, no, sorry, Mike, you made the point about getting up in the morning to go training. Yeah. They had this, a single-minded, a drive, a purpose, yeah? And you need to be very careful of them, you know? I mean, Ross, you've probably, worked in overtraining scales, yeah? And trying to avoid athletes overtraining. And of course, they suss out they suss it out and they fib, because they want to train more, yeah? So you have to explain things that, I mean, I always explain it. I say, right, training is like a cliff. And if you train too hard, you'll go over the cliff, and that's no good for you. Looks bad on my CV anyway. But you go over the cliff, and then we're in trouble. But if you don't train close enough to the cliff, someone else will train harder. So what we need to do is we need to help you, Mike, and it's going to be different for you than it is for you, Ross, to where your cliff edge is. Yeah, and then we're going to vary it, which means we monitor, which means it's individual. So you mentioned, Ross, about this isn't a system thing, yeah? And the big thing for me is we're coaching a group of individuals, and that's what we do. We monitor individuals.
So what you're saying with these top performers, and just to, if I can allow myself to try and praise it, is that one of the characteristics of a top performing person is that you almost have to hold them back. They are undeniably enthusiastic about pushing the limits of their bodies and psychology. Is that one of the?
Yes, that's very fair. And the multiple medalists, the multiple winners, are very conscious of the need for, you know, to be able to moderate. Yeah, some aren't, and you can see them and they fall over, but most are, and they're going, if I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this next year, and next year, or in the next race, then I've got to adjust. So they're top class performers are very, very aware of what's going on in here and in here.
You see, the reason why I asked this question is I remember interviewing Donovan Bailey many, many years ago. And of course, he was the Atlanta 100-meter gold medalist. And I said to him, when you go into a major event like an Olympic Games or World Championships, how do you take the pressure off, or how do you deal with the pressure? And one of the things he said to me was that he never thinks of one particular event as the be-all and end-all of his career, even in Olympic Games, even in World Championships. When you are talking as a performance psychologist to top athletes, is that a message that you say even at the very highest level, at the best at Olympic Games? Is that one of the messages you send? It's not the be-all and end-all, and does that help athletes manage pressure better? In other words, is that one of the techniques, and
No,
are there others?
I think it is. I mean, you know, for example, probably 6 months before an Olympics, especially, you know, athletes worry about what's going to happen after. So I'm trying to concentrate on this, but I keep going, what's going on over there? So 6 months before, we solve all that. Yeah, that's okay, because you've got other events coming up, and that's fine. So that's going to happen over there. So now we can focus into this one, and then we can finish this one, put it away, and go to the next one. That's fine. And even if this is, I'm going to retire after this, that's okay. What's next? Yeah, because, you know, you live after your final competition. What's going to be next? So we help them with that as well. So that it rationalizes the challenge as to where you are. Yeah.
So in other words, does that help a top performer to rationalize the pressure compared to somebody who might be 5th, 6th, and 7th? Is that a differentiator, do you think, that ability?
I think it's okay. I think when you, in certain events, you get sort of probably top 5-ish who can win this. You know, you see, for example, the women's mountain biking. Yeah. Woman, I think, was 2 or 3 minutes off in front. You know, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Jess Fox in the women's kayak slalom, you know, she's that much further ahead. Okay, fine. So there it is. Now we're fighting, but it's what do you do to concentrate here? I love there's a quote from just after the Second World War. So a guy was he was a batsman for England, and someone said, well, how do you cope with the pressure of opening batting? He said, opening batting, pressure, having a Messerschmitt up your ass, that's pressure. So again, you rationalize where the pressure is. Yeah. Yes, there's pressure. Who is, do they matter? No, you. This is you. This is for you. Yeah. This is for you, your family, you've done all this. Now that's pressure. However, you're all right, you can handle it. Mm-hmm. So I think rationalizing and talking through and recognizing the sources of the pressure, because the media will try and heap pressure on by saying, oh, we expect you to win your 3rd gold, or we expect you to do this, or we expect you to do that. Just say, no, this is you. What do you want?
Maybe the answer to this is straightforward, and you just said it's the converse of what I've just explained as the good behavior. But if you were to identify certain behaviors, thinking errors, psychological mistakes that athletes make that then trips them up on those big stages, what would they be?
I've certainly encountered them, and I expect them. They usually start with I must, got to, yeah, or I really should.
Yeah.
And you're going, okay, and this is, I mean, again, this is so hackneyed, I'm sorry, but it's control what you can control. What's in your control? Can you control your opposition? No. Yeah, or maybe in some circumstances in judo, yes, you can. But you know, what can you control? Okay, let's focus. Let's do. So let's finish it, knowing you've done everything you could. Yeah, that's fine. And so we would, you know, we would work through a check. We would, I mean, depending on how into this they were. Some were very anal about ticking every box. Some were, no, you sort it out. You're all right. We'll sort it. But you know, when I was a performance director of athletics, we had a P to the power 7 approach: perfect prior preparation, prevent performance. And we would work through to make sure that everything was allowed for: travel, arrival, holding camp, into the village, at the village, warm up, and we've worked with them over a period of time. I think you might mention confidence, and we're going, look at all these things. We've ticked them all off. We've done it. We're there. Yeah, it's all right. You can have confidence. Our preparation has been thorough. So if I do get those sorts of musts, shoulds, got to, then you challenge them. And as a counsellor, the approach I use is a thing called rational emotive behaviour therapy, which is rationalising the link between what you think, which can often catastrophize, great word, and their behaviour. And if you don't challenge that early, then you don't address that early, then you're laying in problems for later. So those sorts of rational thoughts, or even rational thoughts, you know, I see one Olympian who had been disqualified in every event all the way through this Winter Olympics, and then the next Winter Olympics. So you've got to rationalize that. You've got to be addressing that back here. You can't get there and try and sort it out.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why it's an interesting subject, because when we look at the Olympic Games, which we're during the time that we're recording this podcast, is that I've just seen a French woman win the triathlon. We saw a French woman win the mountain biking, and a French man do very well in the mountain biking, probably one of the favorites, but not, you know, the favorite. Yeah. There is something about the being at home and the psychology and the pressure and the enthusiasm of that raises people's performance. So yes. in other words, sometimes, like for instance, a hometown advantage certainly seems to be a positive rather than a negative from what we've seen at the Olympics this year. So is it about that? In other words, can psychology make you basically outperform your body in many ways?
Of course it does. That's why when I went through school, I was triple maths and physics, very hard science. And then I went through the military, and I went to college to train as a teacher. And the physiologist, and I was very into physiology, did a max test on the treadmill, volitional exhaustion. And I said, how do you know it's a max test? And he looked at me witheringly and went, because they stop. And I just spent several years knowing that I didn't stop, because if I did stop, I'd have a size 13 up my backside, or someone would shoot me. So I tended to push on. So my favorite physiology tale came a bunch of American footballers who did a fitness test of volitional exhaustion. And then a couple of days later, they changed the sex of the tester, and they all got 3 to 5% fitter. You know, and so I recognized that this isn't everything, that there's this thing as well. I don't think this is everything. There's this thing as well. But
so your point for those of you who are not seeing the video, obviously you're pointing to your head versus your heart.
Yes, that's right. And you know, there's a lot of very good stuff, and Ross has been, you know, instrumental in generating some of this stuff, and you know, it's really important. So what you're saying, oh by the way, I can't let your statement follow. It does help, of course, that the French have lived at the slalom course for the last year and a half. Yeah, it does help that, you know, you get restricted access to a skeleton bobsleigh track, yeah, whereas the other guys live there. So there are all sorts of other, it's not just the home advantage of the home show. But yes, of course, you know, because it focuses the mind even more, and it tends to get people to do a bit more. You've got to be careful they don't do too much, but yes.
That thing about the max test getting better when a woman was observing it in men, we did a similar thing. We asked people doing a time trial for the rating of perceived exertion, you know, where like 0 is I'm on the couch relaxing, and 10 is this is me, I'm done, I'm cooked. And you get the same thing. If you ask men doing a 5K time trial and you're a man, they'll give you 8s, 9s, 10s. A woman, you give them 5 or 6. You know, the guy, what's your RPE? Is like, I'm cooked, I'm dying, 6. So people don't want to disclose it. So the point is that what we think is the ceiling is not really the ceiling.
And
is the differentiator then the mind?
No. You see, here's a magic word. Another magic word for you: biopsychosocial.
Yes, I love that word.
Oh, it's a great word. It's also a good Scrabble score, but it's perfect. It's absolutely what you work on. So of course, biological is important. Of course it is, but the interaction of the bio and the psycho and the social, yeah, that's the key. That's the key. So sometimes you can go 101, 102%, and you might go 101, 102% because you can drive yourself. Or you might go 101, 102% because everybody else you're working with has, and so you do as well. Yeah. So it is a case of looking at and making sure all the ducks are in a row in terms of all those different components. Is the environment right? Is the team right? I mean, another thing, we're talking about the Olympics, another thing is that seems to work is that early success sort of gets people on a roll, and it does, it does well. That if the team succeed early, then people start going, oh, well, I can. He did, I can. Oh, well, okay, and away you go. So there are complexities to this. It's not black and white.
Well, here's the one question that I've been basically keeping for one of my last questions, because I think it's the one question I've always wanted to ask.
Here we go.
It's a big one. It's a big one. I'm not going to lie, and I'll understand if you have to talk around it. But is it fair to say, or in fact, I don't even want to go that far, is there a psychology in top performing sportsmen, or any field for that matter, that is unhealthy psychologically? And I'll give you an example.
No, yes.
Do you have to be a narcissistic, self-involved, selfish person to be a top-class sportsman? Is that a necessity? And is there a psychology amongst sports people that requires that?
I mean, the short answer is yes, of course, because we're talking about extremes of behavior. Yeah, I mean, ask Ross as a physiologist if there are risks to being a swimmer. Your heart gets massive. Yeah, are there risks to playing for the Springboks? Yes, your complexion gets damaged. Of course, yeah. but clearly not enough, because the beggars keep winning. But of course there are, because the extremes of behavior are extremes of behavior, and with the caveat that one man's extreme is another man's norm. Remember? Yeah. All of a sudden, yes, of course. Most you would say most high achievers are at least mild to moderate obsessive compulsive. They're at least mild to moderate in terms of performance related depression. You've mentioned narcissism, sociopath. That most elite athletes are selfish. Yeah. So yes, there are traits. It's not a case of someone who wins a gold medal is a hero and should be sent on a lecture tour from every school in the country to try and bring them forwards. Yeah, there are some very dysfunctional characteristics, and you make the most of. But would you say the same applies to any successful business person?
Well, yeah, I guess it does apply to anybody that's in a half-performing position. But having met with a variety of top sports people over the years, my general consensus is that selfish, obsessive compulsive nature is certainly part of it. But there's also a part of it that I'm fascinated by in terms of the ability to switch off overthinking things. Because I think I often think sometimes that my amateur performance as a cyclist is that I maybe think about it too much, whereas a professional sportsman doesn't really think about what he's doing. He just goes out and does it without any question.
Yeah, no, he thought about it. He thought about it beforehand. He got it really well planned back here. Yeah, but of course, your point here is that extreme performance, high level performance, by definition, requires extreme characteristics. Another thing about sports people is that most sports people are very conscious of their image. Their presentational skills are very, very good. They won't present to you a true picture. Yeah, that's not saying that they're Machiavellian. I mean, because the normal people self-present, don't they? You present. I'm trying desperately to convince you that I'm actually quite an intelligent scientist, whereas Ross knows I'm a complete ass. But it just trying to get that across. So people who are successful in life, mostly, not exclusively, will have some characteristics which might be dysfunctional in certain circumstances, and most will be very able and aware of when to deploy them and when not. So one of the things that I do as a psychologist is I say, you have a set of characteristics, and those characteristics bring strengths and weaknesses. Yeah, I have to optimize the strengths and minimize the weaknesses in this context. That's fine. Yeah, so there's no such thing as this is a strength, this is a weakness. Here are some characteristics. Well, how do we make the most of them? Do I need to give you some extra characteristics? Do I need to give you some extra skills and encourage you to use them more? I do? Okay, no worries. And this applies, this is the science of behavior change. And this applies as much, my wife is a nutritional therapist. So she's working with people, for example, wanting to lose weight. And lots of the stuff she will do will be take 2 of these, look at this diet, take these supplements, but also it will be, here are some strategies for behavior change that you can use in anticipation of the bringing the sweet trolley around. You're trying to give up smoking. When's the pinch point? Everybody goes outside for a fag. Okay, fine. In which case they will go outside. You get the round in. Anticipate the situation and build in a behavioral strategy. Now, that's exactly the same thing. I spoke to a guy this morning who's got the final tomorrow. We're going, okay, so what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Okay, fine. Same thing. Same thing.
So just taking an extreme example of that, based on that, and based on the idea that the mind can play a massive role in performance, do you think that training has as much to do with convincing yourself of your ability as it does to do with your physiological development? In other words, if I can convince myself that riding once a week is going to let me perform well at a race, am I likely to perform well at a race because my body follows my mind? I mean, is that a push too far?
I think everybody wants to cut it and draw a percentage pie chart and say it's that much, it's that much, it's that much. And of course it varies, doesn't it? Because on the day, could you push yourself harder? Yes. But wouldn't it have been better if you'd have pushed yourself harder for the previous 6 months and got up in the morning and done those miles? It would. Okay. So it's a case of where you deploy it as well. Now, does that mean that performance is a biopsychosocial thing? Yes. Does it mean training and preparation is biopsychosocial? Yes. This is the fascination to me as a psychologist. Everybody in performance, and not just sport, everybody in performance would recognize that there's a mental component to it. So why doesn't everybody do something about it? Never understood that. Never understood it, But even at top level, you've got some coaches, some administrators, some managers who don't think what I do is pretty wiffly waffly. I find that strange, but okay, fair enough.
Just one story on that, actually, to your question, Mike. Franz Stamfel was Roger Bannister's coach. And speaking of trauma, I think he came through the concentration camps. In any event, he had a quote in which he said that training is principally an act of faith. That was his paradigm, was that you trained in order to create a belief that you were able to perform. Now, as a physiologist, I don't think it is principally an act of faith. It's both. So Dave's right. Everyone wants to say it's 50-50. It's 100-100, right? There's no 2 circles here. It's one overlapping big circle, and both parts matter equally. But it is definitely you train in order to earn the right to believe in your ability, right? But that's an interesting point you then make about why people neglect it. And certainly in South Africa, you guys in the UK, the criticisms you have of your system and so on, we haven't even earned the right to criticize because we don't have a system of sports psychology and performance psychology in this country. It's completely neglected. And I've worked with some teams and trying to persuade coaches and individual athlete coaches that they need to try and introduce some sports psychology to them is actually an insult, because I don't know whether it's because they believe that psychology is something that's experienced and therefore as a living human, as a coach, I can do it myself. I don't know what it is that devalues it like that.
Well, I think a lot of coaches say, it's certainly some of the professional team sports I've worked in the UK. Yeah, well, I do that. And my point is, well, yeah, you might be able to do that, but it's very difficult to do that with your role. I was the performance psychologist for UK Athletics. I became the performance director. I couldn't carry on being a performance psychologist. I couldn't, because the role I had, the way I had to interact with people had to change. But just going back to your point, you as a physiologist or as a strength conditioner, whatever, if you were to sell the idea to the players that this was a really good program, it would be a better program. Fair?
Oh yeah.
So it's not just the facts of what you do, it's the salespersonship of, and this will make you this and this will make you that. So the element of faith is something, and I speak as a qualified strength conditioner, is something that I'd very much sell. This is great training. Look what you can do. You know, look, you're training harder. We've prepared better than anybody else. But I take your point, Ross. You know, I think psychologists often don't do themselves a lot of favors because they either hide their light under a bushel or they come over as too well-being-y and not performance enoughy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have done work with military special forces in performance psych. Recently supervised a Norwegian guy, special forces, who used performance psychology in preparation for missions, and they accepted it because it was presented in a way that said, this is going to help you perform. You know, in actual fact, this is going to help you come home alive. Oh, I'm interested in that. I'll do that. and away you go. So fair enough. So it's the presentation of it. It's what it's presented as doing. By contrast, I have another one of my practitioners who I think has been seen in her role as a psychologist with an Olympic team as the person who sorts out the moans and the whinges. Yeah. So she was seen as some form of counselor or well-being consultant, as opposed to a performance psychologist. I'm a performance psychologist. I want to be a counselor. I'll go over there and do counseling, but I'm a performance psychologist. That's my bottom line. And I should be held accountable for that in the same way Ross should be as a physiologist.
Final question from me, just before Ross finishes off. But give us an example of an athlete that you've worked with that has benefited from the stuff that you're talking about. In other words, the psychological training that you might put them through. And you don't have to mention any names, but maybe give us an example of somebody that you've seen a true benefit in that working with you.
Well, I can't mention any names, and neither would I or should I. My code of conduct forbids it. I think you're asking the wrong bloke. I think you ask them. Yeah. All I can say is that I'm sought after. People come back to me and carry on working with me. I started work with a certain New Zealand athlete when he was 14. Got his first medal at his first Olympics, 16. He's gone through. We're still working together. Now, the relationship we have is somewhat different, but he's coming back. And I mean, I'm sure he's coming back for my magnetic personality and my endless knock jokes. I don't think so. You know, so the proof of the pudding. Yeah. Now, that means that you can work in a variety of different ways. And so I run a company of 14 people, you know, soon to be 15. And I recognize when I talk to a potential client and say, look, you know, we've got a number of they come in different shapes and sizes and ages. Yeah. You're talking about a young 15-year-old young girl. She probably doesn't want to talk to me. I'm probably her grandfather. Actually, with this beard, probably her great-grandfather. Why doesn't she work with this practitioner? That would fit better. Yeah. Other people, you know, so it's horses for courses. And that interpersonal relationship applies even in physiology. You get someone, you say, right, you know, this practitioner, they know the same stuff. But again, recent work from one of my doctoral students on the what are called the soft skills of a strength conditioner, in terms of the extent to which he or she convinces the players that this is the right thing to do, gets the coach on the side, fits it in. Yeah, it's a biopsychosocial issue again. So I can't give you any names. But I'm still making a living at it, Mark, and Mike, and of course you're talking to me, so I can't be that much of a career, I can.
Absolutely.
My final question is: you spoke earlier about the 10 PDEs. What, remind me of that abbreviation?
Psychological characteristics of developing excellence.
PCDs.
Yeah.
And you also gave us some examples of thinking patterns and behaviors that are undermining performance. I want to know from you whether you think any of those should ever form part of talent identification. If so, how early can you identify someone who naturally shows those positive attributes and traits and doesn't have the negative ones? And if so, so it's 3 parts, how pliable are people to change them and create in them those things? Because I would imagine there comes a point at which actually we are the product of years and years worth of experiences and exposures. And whilst you may theoretically be able to change someone, the cost benefit analysis just does not work out. And you have to say, you don't have what it takes.
No,
or not.
as ever, you know, you're absolutely right. Yes, of course, they're teachable, and it's a damn sight easier if you start early, and therefore they're part of a curriculum that we put into an academy diet. That's what we do. They are implementable in later age, but was it how many psychologists did it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but the light bulb really got to want to change. So if you've got people who are going, no, I really do want to achieve. I'm 40-ish. I've come late to shooting. I really want to be successful at this. Okay, fine, let's do it. Yeah, that's okay. You're committed to it, and away we go. So it is modifiable. But you're right, Ross. You know, we are the beneficiaries. Was it? There's a they muck you up, your mum and dad, and gives it, as the poet says. So all of a sudden you're talking about a necessity to work with and through the family if you're working with young children, with and through the family if you're talking about an older guy, guy or guyess with marriage and etc. So you're working on the environment around them. Are they identifiable? Yes, because we make them psychobehavioral. So we look at the behaviors that would be the consequence of someone using them. Would we use those as selection tools? No, because we're signing kids at 7 in a professional football academy in the UK.
Yeah, that's wild to me. I can't believe that.
Yeah, and the main reason I think is so we've got them and they haven't.
Yeah, it's a opportunity cost. It's driven by opportunity cost.
That's
sure.
wrong.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But my point is that, even at that young age, and again, we've just put out a paper on it, that even at that young age, they're arriving with stuff. So you don't think that, right, here's the next one for the sausage factory. They're a blank slate, and I'll start with this. You say this person's got strengths and weaknesses. This person's got weaknesses and strengths. Remember, this person's got characteristics. What can I build? Yeah, and I might make their strength a super strength, and I might address some of their characteristics that carry particular problems and work on them as well. But I wouldn't identify on them, because if you identify, you probably are in no small part identifying the quality of their parenting.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. And I thought you would answer it that way, because obviously in Talent ID, we measure things. We can measure jump height. We can measure peak height velocity. You can measure physiological attributes in a lab, stick someone on a bike or treadmill, whatever it is, at whatever age. And you're trying to then make a prediction of the future based on what you see in the present, which is a consequence of the past. And so you don't know which direction you're facing, actually. You've got a tense problem. So, but we do it, right? We do it physiologically. But we don't do it. And I'm involved now. Sorry, go on.
No, please go on. Yeah, you're involved.
I was just going to say, I'm involved now in this project in Stellenbosch. We take these young kids, cyclists, track and field athletes at the age of 13, 14, because we then give them scholarships to come to the high school and try and produce out of them adults who, graduating kids who can be good enough athletically maybe to get a scholarship in the US and so on. And the biggest question we have, and the thing we cannot answer, is can we identify drive? Can we identify someone who's got the ambition and who really wants to succeed? Or are we just seeing someone who's an early developer or had an aggressive coach when they were 10, 11, and 12? And it's a psychological question that we can't answer.
The point is that you can answer it if you consider it as a psychobehavioral question.
So what are the behaviors that then indicate that when they're in the shop window for a short time? You're not.
Yeah, no, I know. But you see, this is the point. Snapshot assessments don't work. I mean, again, we've written on that. Loads of people have written on that. They don't work. So what you need to do is you need to look at people over a period of time and see how they react. Yeah. And when you do that, then you start to see, okay, yeah, this guy has the raw materials. Now we can work it. But they also have to be coachable, don't they? And in this circumstance, coachable for psychological characteristics. But yeah, in other words, the stuff I do, the assessments I do are essential, but they're formative. They're not summative. They're not like a driving test. You passed, you failed. You're at this level. I think that's enough, but we'll give you a bit more, or you're at this level, mate, you ain't going to make it. Let's push it through. And that's very, very much done in conjunction with and through the coach, with and through the parents, with and through the young athlete. She or he needs to push, and it works very well. But if you ignore it, the other question, Ross, is people say, how young can you do psychology? And my answer is, well, if they're young enough to worry, if they're old enough to worry, they're old enough to do something about it. Surely. You know, I mean, I might change my terminology. So when I'm working with 5 and 6 year olds, I start talking about Zanussi stomach or sticky pits. And so I can look at them across a room and go,
again, I wish you had video of this.
yeah, I'm sorry, no, we're not on video. I was saying, all my
we'll load this on YouTube.
My acting skills at cast. Okay. Anyway, but the point here is that what you're looking at is a circumstance of working with what you got, which means assessment or case conceptualization in my field is absolutely crucial. It's not an absolute line. Yes, you pass. Yes, you fail. Off you go. And the schemes that have tried to do that, famously from the AIS, Sport Search and Talent Search, have failed miserably.
Yeah. Interesting. And just, I mean, you mentioned very early, halfway through the podcast, that you were the master of the knock-knock joke. So I'm going to have to ask you to give us one knock-knock joke to end off our podcast with you.
Gosh.
That's the hardest question, isn't it?
Now I'm under pressure. Oh Lord! But it's not just thinking of the joke; it's thinking of a clean one. And on that bombshell, I think I'll leave it at that.
Leave it at that. Dave Collins, thanks very much for your time, and really appreciate it.
You have been listening to the Science of Sport podcast.